Content warning. The following episode contains descriptions of violent crime involving children and may not be suitable for all listeners. Discretion is advised. The man walked slowly through Wild Park in Brighton, England, looking for his missing granddaughters. It was the evening of October 9th, 1986, and 9-year-old Nicola Fellows and 10-year-old Karen Hadaway had been missing for over 24 hours. Barry Fellows had been searching with police and volunteers since the girls disappeared during a family barbecue the day before. They had gone to play in the nearby woodland and never returned home. As he pushed through a dense thicket of brambles and undergrowth, Barry found them. There, lying in a small clearing hidden from the main footpaths, were two small bodies. His granddaughter and her friend were dead. Nicola lay on her back with her arms positioned neatly by her sides. Karen was found face down nearby, her body also carefully arranged. Both girls were partially clothed, and it was immediately clear to the shocked grandfather that they had been murdered. October 8th, 1986 was a warm autumn day in Brighton, England. The Fellows family had organized a barbecue at their home on Newick Road in Molsicum, a working-class estate on the outskirts of the seaside city. Michelle Fellows had invited her friend Lee Hadaway and her daughter Karen to join the family gathering. Karen was 10 years old, a bright girl who loved reading and spent most of her free time with her best friend Nicola Fellows, who was 9. The barbecue was held in the back garden of the Fellows' home, which bordered Wild Park, a large area of woodland and open space that separated Molsicum from neighboring Hollingbury. The park was popular with local families, offering footpaths, open grassland, and dense areas of trees and undergrowth. Around 6:30 in the evening, after eating and playing in the garden, Nicola asked her mother Susan if she and Karen could go into Wild Park to play. The girls often played in the woods, and their families considered it safe. Local children regularly used the park as their playground. Susan Fellows told the girls they could go, but must be back before dark. Nicola and Karen ran through the gap in the back fence that led directly into Wild Park. Several family members saw them enter the woodland, heading toward an area known as the Den, where local children had built a makeshift shelter. When darkness fell around 8 o'clock, the girls had not returned. Susan Fellows walked to the fence and called their names into the woods. There was no response. By 9 o'clock, both families were becoming concerned. Lee Hadaway and Michelle Fellows searched the immediate area around the house, calling for the girls and checking with neighbors. No one had seen Nicola or Karen since they entered the park. At 10:30 that evening, the families contacted Sussex Police to report the girls missing. Officers arrived and began an immediate search of Wild Park using flashlights and dogs. The search continued through the night but found no trace of either child. The next morning, October 9th, police expanded the search operation. Over 100 officers, volunteers, and members of both families joined the effort to find Nicola and Karen. Helicopters flew overhead, while search teams combed every part of the extensive parkland. Local residents joined the search, including Russell Bishop, a 20-year-old roofer who lived nearby and knew both families. Bishop had spent time with the Fellows family and was friendly with Susan Fellows. He volunteered to help look for the missing girls. The search continued throughout the day with no success. Wild Park covered several hundred acres with dense woodland, open fields, and numerous footpaths. Despite the large number of searches, the girls remained missing as evening approached. Just before 6 o'clock, Barry Fellows was searching a particularly dense area of brambles and undergrowth when he made the horrific discovery. His granddaughter and her friend were dead, hidden in a thicket approximately half a mile from where they had entered the park. Detective Chief Inspector Martin Underhill arrived at Wild Park within minutes of the bodies being discovered. A senior investigating officer, he immediately secured the crime scene and called for forensic specialists. The location where Nicola and Karen were found was a small clearing hidden deep within a thicket of brambles and dense vegetation. The area was not visible from any of the main footpaths and would have required local knowledge to locate. Both girls had been sexually assaulted and strangled. Nicola Fellows lay on her back with her arms positioned straight down by her sides. Her clothes had been partially removed and carefully folded nearby. Karen Hadaway was found face down, also partially undressed with her clothing arranged in a similar manner. The positioning of the bodies and clothing struck investigators as deliberate and ritualistic. The killer had spent time at the scene, arranging everything with apparent care and precision. Forensic examination revealed that both girls had been strangled manually. There were no signs of a struggle at the location, suggesting they had been killed elsewhere and moved to the hiding place. The careful arrangement of the scene indicated the killer was not panicking, but working methodically. Pathologist Dr. Vesna Jurovic conducted the post-mortem examinations. She determined that both girls had died from compression of the neck, consistent with manual strangulation. The sexual assault had occurred after death, which added a particularly disturbing element to an already horrific crime. Physical evidence at the scene was limited. Investigators found no clear fingerprints, no obvious DNA evidence using the technology available in 1986, and no witnesses to the actual crime. The remote location and dense vegetation had provided perfect cover for the killer. One crucial piece of evidence was a sweatshirt found near the bodies. The blue Pinto sweatshirt belonged to Russell Bishop, the local man who had volunteered to help search for the girls. When questioned, Bishop claimed he had lost the sweatshirt while searching the woods earlier that day. Police also discovered that the killer had used a specific route through the park to reach the crime scene location. This route required knowledge of the area and suggested someone familiar with Wild Park and its various paths and hiding places. The forensic team spent days combing the crime scene and surrounding area for additional evidence. They collected samples of vegetation, soil, and any potential trace evidence, but the outdoor location and weather conditions had degraded most physical clues. Detective Chief Inspector Underhill launched a massive investigation involving over 200 officers. The case, dubbed the Babes in the Wood Murders by the media, became one of Sussex Police's largest ever investigations. Police interviewed hundreds of local residents, searched numerous properties, and followed up on over 2,000 reported sightings and tips from the public. The investigation focused heavily on local men with access to the area and any history of offenses against children. Russell Bishop quickly emerged as the prime suspect. He was 20 years old, lived locally, knew both families, and his sweatshirt had been found at the crime scene. When police examined his background, they discovered he had a previous conviction for sexual assault. In 1981, Bishop had been convicted of indecently assaulting a 7-year-old girl in Brighton. He had served time in prison and was known to local police as someone with an interest in young children. Bishop's explanation for the sweatshirt was that he had been helping search for the girls and must have lost it while pushing through dense undergrowth. He claimed he had no memory of exactly where he had searched. Police arrested Bishop on October 16th, 8 days after the girls disappeared. During questioning, he maintained his innocence and claimed he had only been trying to help find the missing children. The case against Bishop was largely circumstantial. Apart from the sweatshirt, there was no physical evidence linking him to the murders. No witnesses had seen him with the girls, and he had alibis for parts of the relevant time period. However, police believed the sweatshirt evidence was compelling. Forensic examination found fibers on the clothing that were consistent with materials found at the crime scene. The location where it was discovered near the bodies suggested the killer had worn it during the crime. Bishop was charged with the murders of Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway on November 7, 1986. The case went to trial at Lewis Crown Court in November 1987. The prosecution case was presented by Brian Higgs QC, who argued that Russell Bishop had lured the two girls into the woods, sexually assaulted and murdered them, then carefully concealed their bodies in the remote thicket. The key evidence was the Pinto sweatshirt found at the crime scene. Forensic expert Dr. Peter Vanizis testified that fibers found on the sweatshirt matched materials discovered near the bodies. The prosecution argued this proved Bishop had been present during the murders. Bishop's previous conviction for sexual assault was presented as evidence of his propensity to commit crimes against children. The prosecution suggested he had escalated from indecent assault to murder. Several witnesses testified about Bishop's behavior during the search for the missing girls. Some claimed he had seemed unusually knowledgeable about where to look and had suggested searching areas that were later found to be close to where the bodies were discovered. The defense, led by Ivan Lawrence QC, argued that the evidence was purely circumstantial and insufficient to prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt. They emphasized that no witnesses had seen Bishop with the girls and that his sweatshirt could have been lost innocently during the search operation. The defense also questioned the reliability of the forensic evidence. They argued that fiber evidence was not conclusive proof of Bishop's presence during the murders, particularly given that he had admittedly been searching the same general area. Bishop testified in his own defense, maintaining his innocence and explaining his actions on the day the girls disappeared. He claimed he had genuinely been trying to help find them and had lost his sweatshirt while pushing through dense vegetation. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for over 6 hours before returning a verdict of not guilty on December 10, 1987. Russell Bishop was acquitted of both murders and walked free from court. Less than 3 years after his acquittal, Russell Bishop was involved in another shocking crime that would ultimately change everything about the Babes in the Wood case. On February 4, 1990, a 7-year-old girl was playing near her home in Brighton when she was approached by a man who offered her sweets. The child, who cannot be named for legal reasons, was then abducted and taken to Devil's Dyke, a remote beauty spot on the South Downs above Brighton. At Devil's Dyke, the man sexually assaulted the child and then attempted to strangle her. Believing she was dead, he threw her body over a cliff edge. Miraculously, the little girl survived the fall and was found alive by dog walkers the following morning. The child was rushed to hospital with severe injuries, including a broken arm, fractured ribs, and extensive bruising. Despite her trauma, she was able to provide police with a description of her attacker. Based on her description and the similarity to the Babes in the Wood murders, police quickly identified Russell Bishop as a suspect. He was arrested and charged with the attempted murder and sexual assault of the 7-year-old girl. At his trial in December 1990, Bishop was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. The judge described the crime as one of the most horrific he had ever encountered and noted the similarity to the unsolved Babes in the Wood murders. This conviction proved that Bishop was capable of exactly the type of crime that had killed Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway. Many people, including the victims' families, believed it vindicated their long-held suspicion that he was responsible for both murders. For over 20 years, the Babes in the Wood murders remained officially unsolved. Russell Bishop was in prison for the Devil's Dyke attack, but he had been acquitted of the Brighton murders and could not be retried under double jeopardy laws. The families of Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway never stopped believing that Bishop was responsible for killing their daughters. They campaigned for years for the case to be reopened and for new forensic techniques to be applied to the evidence. In 2009, Sussex Police began a cold case review of the murders. Advances in DNA technology had made it possible to extract genetic profiles from much smaller and more degraded samples than had been possible in 1986. Detective Chief Inspector Adam Hibbert led the review team. They re-examined all the physical evidence from the original crime scene, including items that had been stored in police evidence rooms for over 20 years. The breakthrough came when forensic scientists were able to extract a DNA profile from a piece of evidence that had not yielded useful results in the original investigation. Using modern techniques, they found male DNA that had not been identified before. The DNA profile was run through the national database, which contained genetic information from all convicted criminals. The search produced a match to Russell Bishop, whose DNA had been taken following his conviction for the Devil's Dyke attack. This was the first direct physical evidence linking Bishop to the babes in the Wood crime scene. The DNA evidence, combined with the circumstantial evidence from the original investigation, provided a much stronger case than had been available in 1987. However, there was a significant legal obstacle. Bishop had been acquitted of the murders in 1987, and the principle of double jeopardy traditionally prevented anyone from being tried twice for the same crime. The discovery of DNA evidence linking Russell Bishop to the babes in the Wood murders created an unprecedented legal situation. Bishop had been acquitted, but new evidence suggested he was guilty. In 2005, the Criminal Justice Act had been amended to allow retrials in exceptional circumstances where compelling new evidence emerged. However, this law had rarely been used, and never in such a high-profile case. Sussex Police and the Crown Prosecution Service had to convince the Court of Appeal that the DNA evidence was sufficiently compelling to warrant a retrial. They argued that the new evidence was so significant that it undermined the safety of the original acquittal. The families of Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway supported the application for a retrial. They had waited over 30 years for justice and believed the DNA evidence finally provided the proof they had always known existed. In May 2018, the Court of Appeal ruled that Russell Bishop could be retried for the murders. The judges agreed that the DNA evidence was compelling and that it was in the interests of justice to allow a second trial. This decision was groundbreaking in British legal history. It marked one of the first times that someone acquitted of murder had been ordered to face retrial based on new forensic evidence. Bishop, now in his 50s and still serving his life sentence for the Devil's Dyke attack, would face trial again for the murders he had been acquitted of 3 decades earlier. The retrial of Russell Bishop began at the Old Bailey in London on October 1, 2018. The case had been moved from Brighton to ensure a fair trial given the extensive local publicity over 3 decades. The prosecution was led by Brian Altman QC, who presented both the original circumstantial evidence and the new DNA findings. The key piece of evidence was Bishop's DNA found on a piece of clothing recovered from the crime scene. Forensic scientist Dr. Ross Hammond testified that the DNA profile found on the evidence was 1 billion times more likely to belong to Russell Bishop than to any other man. This was the strongest possible forensic evidence, short of an exact match. The prosecution also presented evidence about Bishop's behavior during the original search for the girls. Witnesses testified that he had seemed to know more about the layout of Wild Park than would be expected from his claimed level of familiarity with the area. The defense, led by Joel Benetton QC, argued that the DNA evidence could have innocent explanations. They suggested that Bishop might have touched the item during the search operation, or that the DNA could have been transferred through secondary contact. They also argued that the original investigation had been flawed and that Bishop had been targeted as a suspect because of his previous conviction rather than because of solid evidence linking him to the crime. The trial heard emotional testimony from family members of both victims. Susan Fellows, Nicola's mother, described the impact of losing her daughter and the decades of waiting for justice. Lee Hadaway, Karen's mother, spoke about never giving up hope that the killer would be identified. Bishop, now 51 years old, chose not to testify in his own defense. His legal team argued that the prosecution had not proved their case beyond reasonable doubt and that the DNA evidence was not conclusive proof of guilt. On December 10, 2018, after deliberating for over 8 hours, the jury returned a unanimous verdict of guilty on both counts of murder. Russell Bishop was convicted of killing Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway 32 years after they died. The verdict brought an end to one of Britain's longest-running murder cases and provided closure for families who had never given up seeking justice. Judge Justice Sweeney sentenced Bishop to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 36 years. Given that Bishop was already serving life for the Devil's Dyke attack, the sentence meant he would likely never be released from prison. The judge described the murders as crimes of the utmost gravity committed against 2 innocent children. He noted that Bishop had shown no remorse for his actions and had put the families through decades of additional suffering by maintaining his innocence. Russell Bishop remains in prison serving life sentences for the murders of Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway, as well as for the attempted murder of the 7-year-old girl at Devil's Dyke. The Babes in the Wood murders, which had haunted Brighton for over 3 decades, were finally solved.